President Trump woke up this morning in Scotland and immediately went to hit the links, teeing off at his Turnberry golf course. He's also meeting with top European officials over his tariff policy and facing some international pressure on the desperate situation in Gaza. As overnight, Israel said it would open new aid corridors to ease the starvation there amid growing international outrage. Domestically, even though the president is thousands of miles away, he's still facing questions about the crisis that he and his administration set in motion that has outraged many of his supporters here at home. Demands by his base to see the full files of disgraced pedophile and sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, as he and his attorney general had previously pledged to do. Overnight, Trump threw out another wild threat that seemed perhaps designed to distract, saying that former Vice President Kamala Harris, Oprah Winfrey, and Beyonce should all be prosecuted over 2024 campaign events. But as Republican lawmakers head home for summer break, bracing themselves for demands from their constituents to see the files and for much, much more, it is not clear what Trump's strategy will accomplish when it comes to quieting those concerns. Joining us now is a close ally of President Trump, Senator Markwayne Mullin from the great state of Oklahoma. Senator, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it. Something you said on the Senate floor a couple days ago.
Thanks for having me on, Jake.
Something you said on the Senate floor a couple days ago gained a lot of attention. You were arguing against a push by Democrats who were calling to release the Epstein files in full. Let's play what you said.
I'm sure this would be handled just like any other thing that they've tried to go after, like the baseless impeachments or the unbelievable amount of charges they've tried to file against the president. I'm sure this would be handled the exact same way. What we're simply wanting to do here is give them cover.
Can you explain what you meant when you talked about giving cover there?
Well, Jake, what you're doing is you're taking a 30-second clip from about a 6-minute debate. And by the way, we also put forth a resolution to allow the judges to release the information from these grand juries. So this is political theater. If you listen to the whole debate, you'd clearly understand what we had been talking about was Pam Bondi and the president and Congress wants transparency. We want them to release the files. However, we can't make them release it because of separation of power. The judges, the judicial branch, have the files and they have the documents. Every document that Pam Bondi has, every document that the Kash Patel has, they have been heard by a grand jury. And we saw the judge in Florida say, no, she's not releasing it. We're waiting on the judges in New York to say, are you going to release it or do you not? We all want transparency. And what's funny about this is the Democrats want it too. But when I put forth my resolution calling on them to do the same thing, which is what I was meaning by that term, is that we're trying to agree with Pam Bondi and with President Trump that we want transparency, we want the files released. But when I put my resolution forth, guess what? The Democrats also denied the request. So it's interesting to me, though, Jake, that for the last 4 years underneath President Biden, not one Democrat asked for the files to be released. Now they're all about transparency. But yet President Trump is the most transparent president we've had. I mean, look, you wrote the book literally on the biggest cover-up from the Biden administration, the cover-up that the previous administration covered completely for President Biden the whole time he was in office. So transparency is what we're all about. But the Democrats are trying to distract from their awful record and from the questions they need to ask, like who was signing the executive orders as an auto pen, who was actually choosing to continue to run the Russian Gate when we know it was a huge hoax, who was making the decisions at the White House, and they can't answer that, so they're deciding to run a distraction by this Epstein file when it's a big hoax and the American people know it because they never said a word about it when Biden was in office.
But let's just take a step back here. The reason that we're here where we are is because for years, President Trump and the MAGA base and Trump's allies have been calling for the release of the Epstein files. And then after taking office, take a listen to what Attorney General Pam Bondi has been saying over the course of the past few months. Take a listen.
What you're going to see, hopefully tomorrow, is a lot of flight logs, a lot of names. Everything's going to come out to the public. The public has a right to know. Americans have a right to know.
There are tens of thousands of videos of Epstein with children.
Now the administration is saying they can't release this information. Now, I understand you're talking about a resolution you offered calling for the grand jury to release transcripts from the grand jury investigation into Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, and a judge said no. But there's troves of information that the administration could release tomorrow if they wanted to, and they've been promising to, and they haven't.
Oh, Jake, that's not true. You know better than that too, because you know every piece of file that they have, every video, every document, every flight log has all been heard by a grand jury. They've all been seen by a grand jury. And we want the judges to release it. Pam Bondi has called on the judges to release it. Trump has called on them to release it. And the Congress has called on them to release it. But we can't, because there is a true co-equal branches of government, so we can't force a judicial branch to do anything. All we can do is ask them to do it. We assume
I'm not talking about
that the judges would release it.
I'm not talking about the grand jury stuff. I'm talking about...
there isn't, Jake, there isn't one piece of document that Kash Patel at the FBI or Pam Bondi in her office has that a grand jury hasn't seen. So everything that they have
she was
would
talking
have
about
to be
releasing this
released
information
by the judges.
She was talking about releasing this information. She could release it tomorrow. She doesn't.
She was, but she can't. No, she can't release it until the judges release it. Because if it's been heard by a grand jury, and Jake, you know this, if it's been heard by a grand jury, regardless if Pam Bondi has it or the FBI has it, the judge that overseen the case that the grand jury listened to and saw the documentation and the evidence has to be released by the judge. And you know that.
I don't think that that's correct. I think that the FBI and the Southern District of New York and the Southern District of Florida, and just because something has been shown before a grand jury, that doesn't mean it is only going to be, it can only be released to the public by a judge. If the FBI has it, they can release it.
Then why did the judge refuse to release the records in Florida? Because once it's been heard in a case, it is a sealed case. It is sealed by the grand jury. And you have been through this. I don't know why we're even debating this, because if it is considered evidence in a case, then it is sealed.
The information that has been released.
Bring a separate judge on and ask them the same question.
Grand jury hearings and transcripts, the judge has control over. Absolutely. That doesn't mean that everything that went into the grand jury is therefore locked from the public. It does not work that way, and that's why Attorney General Bondi was saying for months. Well, then tell me why for months she was saying that she's going to release the information tomorrow.
We made the assumption that the judges would release the order and allow the evidence that they had, that it could be heard. But it's all been sealed. And so if it's been a sealed case, we can't release it until the judges allow us to release it. And you would think common sense would play. That's why they asked for transparency. We want transparency. We want the judges to have transparency in this too. But remember, there was a plea deal that was struck in 2009, way before I was in office, way before Trump was even considering to be in office, way before Pam Bondi was in office, way before Kash Patel was director. 2009, there was a sweetheart plea deal that was made underneath the Obama administration with Epstein.
That's not
and that sweetheart has not been exposed.
No, it was 2000.
Oh, it's not? Well, when was the case heard?
It was 2008. It was the U.S. attorney at the time was a guy named Alex Acosta. He was a Bush appointee. He went on to become President Trump's Secretary of Labor. It all took place in 2008.
Who was in office at the time?
2008, George W. Bush.
Who was in office at the time?
George W. Bush.
No, 2009 is when the case came out, and it was and Obama was in office at the time.
It's not true. But let me ask you a question. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche met this week with Epstein's accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell, who is serving 20 years in prison for sex trafficking. After the meeting, Maxwell's attorney indicated to reporters that he hopes President Trump will give her a pardon. What do you think of that idea? Will it be a mistake for President Trump to pardon Maxwell? And do you think that she's credible?
I don't know enough about Maxwell or the conversation to even weigh in on that. But I'll go back to what you're saying about it wasn't true. The case was sealed in 2009. That's absolutely true. It was heard in 2008. It was sealed in 2009.
The point is that the sweetheart deal, which was completed in 2008, was under the Bush administration, U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta. That's why Alex Acosta resigned in the first Bush administration, because the Miami Herald had written this story in 2018 about how Epstein got away with so much. And then in 2019, the U.S. attorney under President Trump, Jeff Berman in the Southern District of New York, then brought charges against him. So, I mean, there is stuff to say that you could point to that say, like, President Trump did this or President Trump did that.
And remember, in 2019, President Trump and his administration called for it to be unsealed at that time, too. It went silent, and not a word was said during the Biden administration. Not a word. Nothing was said during the Biden administration.
People can look it up. The sweetheart deal was 2008 during the George W. Bush administration. But I always appreciate your coming on the show. Senator Mullen, thanks for joining us.
Yeah.